But we begin with a Fox News alert. It is midnight in Kyiv, and as Russian troops surround the capital city, a defiant Ukrainian President Zelensky says Russia will have to carpet bomb the capital and kill its residents if it wants to take that city. Trey Yingst joins us live from Kyiv with the latest on the ground. Hey, Trey.
Griff, good afternoon. We've heard some of the loudest shelling since this war began on the outskirts of Kyiv tonight. It's been taking place for about the past 24 hours. These explosions in the distance, not only coming from shelling, but also the anti-aircraft batteries firing off as Ukrainians look to shoot the Russian planes that are overhead out of the sky. The civilian population here still trying to flee for safety, and there are volunteers from all over the world gathered here in Ukraine to help them do so. We met one American this weekend. His name is Dwight Crow, and he traveled to the besieged city of Irpin, just outside of the capital city limits, to try to help these people who are getting out of harm's way. His words here really give you an underline on what people are willing to risk amid this conflict. Take a listen.
Just doing medic work, not even, that. I'm mostly carrying stretchers, helping civilian and wounded evacuation from Irpin. There's a lot of really incredible Ukrainian volunteers that are leading the charge and putting themselves in harm's way for their countrymen, and, I'm just trying to help out.
The evacuations come as some serious shelling has taken place once again in the southern cities in Ukraine. Mariupol, a population of nearly 400,000 people surrounded by Russian forces still at this hour. You can see in this video tanks in the streets firing at civilian areas, apartment buildings, and many people there have been killed, more than 1,600 since the invasion began so far, according to the deputy mayor. Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky remains in the capital. He remains defiant, and he had this to say today.
If they kill all of us, then they will enter Kyiv. If this is the goal, then let them enter, but they will end up living alone on this land, certainly without us. They will not find friends among us.
The streets of Kyiv are prepared for a ground invasion. There are soldiers dug in on the sides of the roads nearly every block. They have checkpoints set up. They've moved barriers into the roadways, and they're ready, heels dug in, to prepare for this possible Russian advance. Back to you.
And Trey, we've been worrying about this push into the capital. You have been doing amazing, phenomenal reporting to give us a sense for what's happening in Kyiv. And it appears that from the northwest along with the northeast, Russian forces really closing in, that artillery shelling getting worse. But yet the south route seems a little bit still open. Talk to me about how important that southern egress route is and really how close you're seeing things closing in, if you can.
Yeah, look, this southern route is extremely significant, not only for civilians to evacuate the city, but also to keep open that critical supply line for Ukrainian military equipment. It's the main line, the artery that has been allowing the Ukrainian forces who are fighting on both the west and east side of this city to do so and then resupply those troops on the front lines. And it will be critical in the days ahead. Analysts do believe the Russian troops intend to try and surround this city, but they will have trouble doing so. And remember, early on in this operation conducted by Russia, there was a sense that the Russians were going to move forward with their invasion very quickly, in 2 to 3 days, try to take the capital of Kyiv. It's been almost 3 weeks, and they haven't been able to do so. So it will be important for the Ukrainians to maintain these lines and keep that southern supply line open so civilians can leave and they can continue to resupply their troops on the front lines.
Hi, Trey. I just hope you're staying safe out there. We're so proud of all your reporting. Listen, you did play a clip there of Zelensky sounding very defiant, but the New York Post reported that in the same interview, he said he wants to start, Zelensky said, he wants to start the process of a peace settlement. I know Germany and France have tried with no luck. What can you tell me about this and also about any efforts on the U.S. side to help move a peaceful settlement along?
Yeah, today Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called for more Western involvement in a peace process. One interesting thing that we learned today is that the Israelis are involved. Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett in the middle of this, trying to convince the sides to come to Jerusalem and have peace talks there. It would be symbolic, but the problem is getting both sides to the table and then having them agree on even the framework of a peace conversation. At this point, it doesn't appear like we are there yet. Both sides are continuing their process, the Ukrainians defending their sovereign country, and the Russians pushing forward with their invasion. The conversations do continue, but a war of this scale is extremely messy, it's extremely complicated, and it makes it very difficult to even start formal conversations that could lead to some sort of peace settlement.
Trey, this is Joey. We've heard all the talk about providing fighter jets, MiGs from perhaps Poland. Our own government's gone back and forth on this, and the Ukrainian president keeps saying they need help to, as they say, close the sky. But what type of, do you see any Ukrainian Air Force in the air in Kyiv protecting the city now? One thing that's been reported, our government said that it's mostly a ground war, and that's why they didn't support it. Another report showed that Ukraine has a lot of jets still of their own. It just seems to not match up what they're asking for as opposed to what our government is saying they have.
Yeah, look, the Ukrainian Air Force is still very much in play here. Early on in the war, we saw a lot more Ukrainian planes in the sky, but they are still operating. They're still able to land at bases in the western part of the country. We don't know exactly the numbers based on the bases because the Ukrainians, they want to keep that information private. But what we do know is they are calling for more jets. They want fighter jets delivered to this country. We've seen the political back and forth. But they do have something extremely important that the Russians say they don't have, and we've seen it in action, and that's air defense systems. They have a number of batteries around this city. We saw them firing off tonight as they're trying to shoot those Russian jets out of the sky. And I think that's where we're going to see most of the aid in the coming weeks focus on, because there is that whole debate of NATO and not wanting to drag in other countries into this conflict. And it's a very fine line here. The Russians today, even the deputy foreign minister, said that they would start targeting the convoys of weapons that are coming in, even if they're delivered by NATO countries. So you imagine if there are fighter jets delivered, it brings up everything to a different level, and it raises that question about whether or not the Russians would directly target foreign planes that are brought here to this country.
Trey, it's Jackie. Good evening to you. You had mentioned that the anticipation on the ground was that the Russian forces would make their offensive on Kyiv quicker. And you said it's taken roughly 3 weeks to try to encroach upon that area. What do you think changed? Is it what we're seeing on the ground with respect to Ukrainians fighting, Ukrainians being willing to stay in their country and try to protect it? Do you think that is strategically what the move is here? Because if it is, it almost sounds like it's become a game of chicken when you hear Zelensky talking about the fact that they'll just have to bomb it and have tremendous blood on their hands.
Yeah, look, I think it's a two-part issue. One has to do with the Ukrainians, one has to do with the Russians. On the Ukrainian side, there's some fierce resistance. The Russians are not walking into Ukraine as early reports indicated they might, and as Moscow really tried to push to their people that they would. And so they've faced very fierce resistance, not only around the capital of Kyiv, but in Kharkiv, a number of the northeastern cities, not as much in the south, but still the Ukrainians are fighting back and trying to push back this Russian offensive. Now, on the Russian side, when we look at these forces, a lot of them are not combat experienced men. They are young 18, 19-year-olds who are conscripts. They're here fighting their first war. And the videos that we've seen of these troops, and Joey probably can speak more to this, but they're not organized in a lot of cases. They get hit once and you see them getting out of their APCs and their tanks and running in different directions. And I think the one thing you'll look at in the coming weeks, and analysts will really observe, is that the Russians have these special units that have been operating. They send them to take over air bases like just outside of the city. But when it comes to just the regular fighting force, the combat troops on the ground, many of them do not have real combat experience. This is the first time they are seeing war, and it's showing in many parts of this war.
Trey, I can't say enough complimentary things about your coverage. You've been doing this now for more than 3 weeks. And I think that aspiring journalists that want to cover armed conflict should study the way you have been able to capture the images of the scorched earth tactics of the Russian forces, to capture the humanity of the civilians fleeing, running for their lives with nothing. But I do want to ask you, just because out of everything you've seen, is there one moment, is there one image, one exchange so far in your mind that really encapsulates, really captures the story for the world to see?
Thank you. And it's a great question. Dwight Crow, the guy that you heard from there in our original piece, there was a moment where he was helping these elderly women across a bridge that had been targeted by the Ukrainians so they could stop the Russian advance on the city. And this location, a number of people have died around there. There have been significant shellings taking place there, even reports of snipers. And it's a volatile situation, but there was this one elderly woman, and she could barely make it across the bridge. But Dwight helped her, and he was helping her the whole way across. And then when she got across the bridge, he kind of went on to help other people as they were crossing, and she started to cry. And it was this moment where he recognized that there was another human that felt safe with him nearby, and they put her into a wheelbarrow because she was so elderly she couldn't walk up this embankment. And as they're taking her up in the wheelbarrow, Dwight reaches his hand out, and he walks up with her holding her hand. And then she gets to the ambulance and just smiles at him and waves goodbye. And that was a moment, I think, that stands out in my mind amid this very dark and destructive time for Ukraine, a moment of light.
And we were just showing that video of Dwight there with that woman. Trey, thank you so much for your coverage, and we will check back in with you as things break. Trey Yingst live for us in the capital city of Kyiv.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.